Many of the rules for living that we have learned over the years are in fact not in the Bible. I dare anyone, to go to their Bible and find me the passage where Jesus says, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. And yet, we know that's just, hey, part of life. Some of us have benefited from that over the years. Some of us have suffered as a result of that over the years, especially if you have been forgetful of your jackets and other things. This gospel that Jesus tells, this parable, he's talking about the kingdom. So he's always talking about, trying to show a way to have people understand better about the ways of God and the reality of God. God not as the restrictive, narrow, law-enforcing entity that so many were taught to believe in. But God is someone who has so much to offer those he loves and wants to offer it so very much. So in this parable, maybe the hook or the catch is that there was so much joy that was involved in discovering the kingdom. But back in those days, back in the time of Jesus, it was not uncommon for people to, when they had possessions, to take and bury them for safety. But it was still considered their possession. And rabbis and other experts in the law would argue back and forth, about how far did that ownership continue on if the person died, did it still belong to the family, blah, 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 back and forth. So somehow in this parable, this man finds a treasure. Now, either it is his field already, which means the treasure is his, in which case he wouldn't have to buy the field, or it is not his. I think probably that's the case, because as Jesus tells us, he buried it right away again and then said, okay, if I have this field, then I'll have the treasure. So he gave all he had. That found treasure meant so much to him. And yet, even though it's something that he had to have, did he achieve it by truly integral means? Or was he a bit dishonest? Was he one who was looking for a loophole so that he could get what he wanted. And as I read this gospel and read this parable, it just reminds me that sometimes we all can get caught up in rationalizing our behaviors. A very, very extreme example of this. If you have ever seen the movie The Godfather, then there is that scene toward the end where Michael Corleone, they are having the scene of his nephew's baptism in the church, and he is standing there and being Godfather. And in between him answering the questions, do you renounce Satan? I do renounce. And then they cut to a scene where some of Michael's henchmen are shooting up some of their enemies. They cut back and he answers another question, and then another hit scene, and back and forth like that. And the contrast, it just has always struck me, is so striking. That this man who in the scene before was just burying his father, and now going through the religious acts, had nevertheless planned this incredible evil and felt justified in doing it because of the ways that he had rationalized with himself, lied to himself over the years. Many of the men who were doing the hits in the previous scene at the funeral, they were standing there over the body, making the sign of the cross. So doing the religious things, but not having the heart. In the Beatitudes, Jesus says, "Blessed are the pure-hearted, for they will see God." And pure-hearted doesn't mean just don't think dirty thoughts. But maybe it's a question more of, as we strive to follow God, as we strive to find the kingdom, do we do so with pure hearts, with pure intentions? Or do we have to argue with ourselves as to why, well, maybe this isn't all that bad? Made me think of it again yesterday when I was hearing confessions that someone, and people, I don't know why people kind of do this. They confess that they have sinned because they have lied, but then they insist on qualifying it. Well, it was only a tiny little white lie. If it's something that you feel is serious enough, then confess it and leave it at that. If it's not all that serious, then trust God. But don't appoint yourself to be your own lawyer in a case where there's no case. Story for you. Reverend Bobby found a diamond by the roadside. But according to the law, finders became keepers only if they first announced their find in the center of the marketplace on 3 separate occasions. Now, Reverend Bobby was too religious-minded to disregard the law and too greedy to run the risk of parting with his find. So on 3 consecutive nights, when he was sure that everyone was fast asleep, he went to the center of the marketplace and there announced in a very soft voice, "I have found a diamond on the road that leads to the town. Anyone knowing who is the owner should contact me at once." No one was the wiser for the Reverend's words, of course, except for one man who happened to be standing at his window on the 3rd night and heard Reverend Bobby mumble something. When he attempted to find out what it was, Reverend Bobby replied, "I'm in no way obliged to tell you, but this much I shall say. Being a religious man, I went out there at night to pronounce certain words in fulfillment of the law." We know, each of us, that in our lives we struggle with times of when do I need to compromise? When are things not as simple or as black and white as it's spelled out there in the law? And God knows that about our lives as well. But we might take a look, re-examine in our dealings with others, in our finances, in how we conduct business. How pure-hearted are we? Or how much are we kidding ourselves that, well, I'll just do the religious things and technically I'm doing what the rules say. But in my heart, the kingdom is there for us in incredible ways. Blessed are the clean-hearted, for they shall see God. We look for God. Maybe sometimes we need to look inside and double check why.